right, we are going to go straight from our little break into a warm up. So it's time to get those brains re engaged back into the content that we are going to be discussing. So let's try one of the famous creative writing prompts that I have been plugging for this entire time. This one is one of my absolute favorites, and it's definitely one that's gotten some amazing responses from students. So you're going to imagine that you're a piece of art hanging on the gallery wall. You're up on the wall, you're a piece of art. What do you see from your perspective? Who is in the gallery and what are their reactions to seeing you? I want you to try and give the audience a sense of what type of art you are, of what you depict, using only the reaction of the gallery visitors. So you're not going to say explicitly what you look like, who you are, if you're even a person. I want you to try and allude to that based entirely on the visitors' responses to you. So we're going to take 5 minutes. This is a little bit shorter than what you would generally spend on this, but it's a bit of a challenge and I'm excited to see what you think. So go ahead, grab a pen, grab some paper, and have a go at this response. We'll get those brains moving, those creative juices flowing, and then we'll get back into the main content. About a minute and a half left. Keep writing, don't think about the time limit. Just get as much down on the page as you can. Oh, there's the awful sound of the timer going off. But there you go. There is your first creative written response, your creative prompt response, I guess. I want you to take a minute to just have a little check-in with yourself and consider how you felt while you were writing that. Did that come very easily? Did that feel very natural? Were the ideas flowing? Or was it a little bit trickier than you might have expected, perhaps? Perhaps you weren't quite sure what direction you wanted to go in, the sentences weren't flowing nicely, all of these sorts of things. Understanding your response to that will help you understand how much these creative responses are going to give you. If you are feeling really confident with writing creatively, then this is something you might want to be doing for fun, to be keeping those muscles working, to be maintaining those creative skills. But if you felt like you struggled a little bit, then doing plenty of these could be an excellent way for you to prepare as you head into these creative tasks and to help you feel a little bit more as if you were prepared and on top of what the creative responses are going to ask of you. So I definitely encourage you guys to be doing more of these, to be continuing to grow and develop your creative writing skills. Just like any other thing, any other habit, any other talent, it is something that can be grown and developed across time. So definitely be continuing to work on those. All right, so your creative written response, just like your multimodal, this piece is open-ended, and it's based around making an original literary text, being really intentional about choices you're making in order to create certain emotional responses within an audience. You're also going to be shaping perspectives and representations in your piece as well. So, because you're in senior, your teachers, as I've mentioned plenty of times, are expecting you to be intentional about the choices that you are making, from the aesthetic features, the names of your characters, the settings that you put them in, the specific cultural context they're in, and so on and so forth. Because in the spirit of setting you up for the real world, that is what real authors do. All right, but unlike your multimodal piece, you have almost complete freedom in what it is you are writing. You don't need to take a key theme or idea, a character, a setting, or anything from any other text and transform it into original work, nor do you have any limitations on what time period or what geography or anything like that your story has to take place in. You don't even have to write it in a certain genre or form of story. You could write a poem, a screenplay, anything like that. So it is so open-ended and allows you to really be creative and to be writing something that you would like to read, that you are passionate about. So the key language that the syllabus uses when it comes to putting this piece together is purposeful. You need to be drawing on all of the knowledge that you have of stylistic devices and aesthetic features from all the other assessment pieces that you have done throughout your schooling, both in English and literature. This includes point of view, narrative voice, non-linear narrative, plot structure, symbolism, motif, setting, dialogue, vocalization, mood. You aren't just throwing these in there and hoping for the best. You are using them to develop and deliver a particular message for your audience. Now, the open-ended nature of this task can make it feel a little bit intimidating to some people who aren't as inclined towards creative writing, but there are definitely some ways that you can steer yourself in a more definitive direction. So, this message that you are trying to deliver to your audience is built around a desire as the author to engage, explore, critique, question, subvert, entertain. It's all about purpose and wanting to achieve something specific in particular. You should have your key message or purpose in a single sentence form at the top of your Word document as you are writing. You want to condense this message down into something really succinct, really clear. Now that sentence isn't going to be staying in your story. Remember, we want to be subtle, we want to be complex in the way that we are developing and delivering this message, but it can be really helpful as you're writing to have it in that really clear form. It just ensures that you're on track, you're not deviating from it, you're not rabbit holing or trying to include too many elements, because we want to remain clear with what that message is. It's important to check it throughout the writing process, but also in particular in the editing process. And it's going to allow you to determine if you've been successful in revealing this message over time. So let's look at the specific criteria that you're going to be asked to be achieving in this particular task. So first up, subtle and complex creation of perspectives and representations of concepts, identities, times, and places in an imaginative text. So just like your other creative piece, we're not just blurting out our message in this really blunt, straightforward, to the point way. We're being more subtle about it. We're using multiple different elements of storytelling and weaving them together towards a singular purpose. We're using discerning manipulation of the ways cultural assumptions, attitudes, values, and beliefs underpin texts and invite audiences to take up positions. Now, not just because you haven't been given a specific particular temporal or geographic context doesn't mean that the context you choose doesn't matter. In fact, you should be thinking about the cultural assumptions, attitudes, values, and beliefs, the cultural implications of your geography and temporal ideas when you are writing. So if you're talking about something in particular, a certain struggle that a people or person group might have, then you need to be thinking about which geography and which time period is going to improve that situation for them or make it more difficult for them, how that might raise the stakes or improve emotional response, those sorts of things. You also need to have discerning use of aesthetic features and stylistic devices to prompt emotional and critical audience responses. So you want people to be thinking and feeling. You're not just influencing emotion with your aesthetic features and stylistic devices, but also the way that people are seeing things. You want them to come to a new understanding. You want to teach them something by the end of the piece as well. You need to have discerning use of the patterns and conventions of an imaginative text and the role as the writer to achieve particular purposes and relationships with audience. So when we talk about particular patterns, we're talking about the structure of a good story, the way that things grow and develop over time, the way mood develops, the way tension develops, the way characters develop and change and grow, the way relationships change and grow, and how the audience might respond to all of those things. You're also thinking about a discerning selection and synthesis of subject matter to support perspectives, and a discerning organization and sequencing of that subject matter, so things flowing logically to achieve particular purposes, including discerning use of cohesive devices to emphasize certain ideas and connect parts of the imaginative text. So the emotional climax of the story, the high point, the most tense part of the story, needs to connect with the original conflict as well as the resolution, so it feels like it flows neatly all together. You also need to have discerning language choices for particular purposes, as well as discerning combination of a range of grammatically accurate and appropriate language structures to achieve particular purposes, including your clauses and sentences. So in creative writing, you can be a little bit more free with how you approach creating your language structures and things like that. You're not confined to that really formal academic tone that you have for most analytical tasks. So I definitely encourage you to be using different types of vocabulary, lengthening and shortening your sentences in different ways, using contractions, all of those sorts of things, using internal dialogue, external dialogue, all of these things. and a discerning use of written features, including conventional spelling and punctuation, to achieve particular purposes. As always, it's really important that you're being intentional with your editing, you're taking the time and leaving yourself enough time as you are writing these pieces to be able to edit well. Now, the best way to do this is to be able to have enough time in this process to finish writing and put your piece away for perhaps a night. So finish it, sleep through, and then the next day you can go through and edit. If you have the luxury of doing so, read it out loud. Make sure that things are flowing nicely. Reading out loud basically just provokes your brain to be understanding and absorbing the information in a new, different way, which means that you're more likely to pick up on mistakes that you might jump over or miss entirely when you're reading in your head and reviewing through like that. You can also peer review, so give it to someone else to have a read through and see if it makes sense. Perhaps see what their emotional response or critical response is at the end of the text, see if that aligns with your intention for that as well. All right. Let's talk really briefly about mind maps. It's something I mentioned all the way back at the start of the session, and this is most helpful for people who are a bit more of a visual learner, but I think it can offer something to everyone. This is a mind map that I made myself way back a million years ago in 2019, and this was for a very similar task. So I wrote about Little Women, which is the book by Louisa May Alcott, and I was thinking about how I might change and transform this into a new piece. So this was not this particular task in the sense that I wasn't writing a wholly unique piece. I was taking elements from the base text. But you can see I have this base text here. I have two of the main characters. I have Laurie and I have Jo, and I am taking this context into a new geographical and temporal context. So I did both. So I had Jo and I'm thinking about how she might change into this new character to create a new response. I was thinking she might be a woman in sport or a more masculine job. I decided that she was going to play rugby in her little town. I was going to say that all of her friends were boys, that she cuts her hair to rebel against her family rather than cutting her hair to save her family, as she did in the original text. And I also decided that Jo was going to become the youngest. She was going to be a little bit more separated from her sisters. She was going to be a little bit more of the black sheep of the family in a way that was not as respected by her family as it was in the book. I also decided that Laurie was going to be best friends with Jo, and I wanted to change the context and the influence of his character a little bit more by making him Aboriginal, a First Nations character, and I had to be really careful and intentional about the way that I wrote that. I had to do a fair bit of research to ensure that I was doing him justice in that sense, but that is definitely something that you can do. Be intentional about it, but do your research and be willing and opening to accept criticism and be changing in that sort of sense. But with the implications of that, I decided that he was not going to be accepted by Jo's family, that he might be adopted by a white man, and that might change his situation, his context as well, and perhaps even has a white name, Teddy. And then I was going to, just thinking more broadly about some of the themes that I was going to incorporate here, considering women's role in society, considering what women want to do themselves rather than what is expected of them. So I did mostly character work on this side, and then I wanted to talk about some of the key things that I was going to retain from the original story and how that might look in my new context. So small town and big family, how those two were going to play together. Everyone knows everyone. They don't want anything to... Meg, Amy, and Beth are bakers or farmer wife types, so more typical classic small town types, and they don't want anything to do with Jo because she is this sort of blatant rebel. That she might have super conservative parents, and this idea that everyone gossips about Jo in this small town. And then this idea of struggle, which was a key theme from the original text, and how was I going to develop that? So this idea that Jo has to fight for acceptance. Not only is she in a man's game, but her parents don't approve, her own, loved ones, her own family don't approve, and this idea that everything she does is some sort of rebellion. So you can see that having this here acts as a bit of a plan for my story, but it allows all of the ideas I had to be out in a clean, clear way in front of me. It allowed me to sort through them, decide which ones I liked, decide which ones I didn't like, and I would not use for this particular story. So it can be really helpful in creating a plan going into your piece, particularly if you're writing something that is wholly original and unique. Perhaps you have lots of ideas, and it can be a great way to actually get the ideas flowing. If you see them in front of you, you can start to see connections that you might not be able to identify otherwise, and things sort of kind of come together quite quickly. So there are plenty of free websites online that you can use to create them, but of course you can just draw up your own on a piece of paper or on something like an iPad as well. So I definitely encourage you to have a go at some mind maps. They can be really helpful. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about writing good characters, because I think in creative pieces, students can get caught up in this idea of thinking a lot about key themes, key aesthetic features, because these are the things that are talked about a lot in the criteria. But the simple fact of the matter is that good characters are absolutely vital to a good story, because your main character is the vessel that carries your message throughout the whole story. If the audience doesn't feel like they can connect or relate to the main character in any way, they're not actually going to engage with any of the key themes or aesthetic features you've so lovingly sort of pulled together. So what makes a good character? What makes a character believable, genuine, relatable, something that the audience can connect to? The very best characters are believable, and the way that humans are complex. They're complicated. They feel and think more than one thing. They actually exist within a whole spectrum of emotion, and they're most often feeling multiple things at the same time. They also have complicated pasts. They come from a whole range of diverse different backgrounds, and humans are wholly unique as well. So this often means that characters within short stories in particular often appear simple, but then through the course of the story, they become more complex and more unique as we learn more about them. The way that a character is, their personality, their character, comes through not only in the way that they act, but also in the way that they speak, the way that they address certain people, the words that they choose to say, the structure of their sentences. All of these things can tell you about a character. And most importantly, characters aren't bogged down by physical description. Because you're writing what is essentially a short story, you don't have the luxury to be spending paragraphs upon paragraphs talking about the exact hue of a character's eyes, or the tone of their skin, or the way that their hair falls. It's quite typical, because that's something you might be taught to do when you're younger, perhaps in primary school, to talk about the way that a character looks. But it's not necessarily important in your story unless it really is to the point that you're trying to make. But most of the time, people don't care. They can come up with what they believe the character looks like in their own mind. Instead, we want to learn more about them, the depth of that character. So to write your own good characters, you need to answer 3 simple questions when you're developing them in your mind. The first one is, what do they want more than anything in the entire world? This is the motivating force behind the story. This is what drives the plot forward. What is it that they want? What is it that they need? Sorry, my blinds just blew a little bit. I got a little scared. I wasn't expecting that. Number 2, what are they willing to do to get what they want? What are they willing to do? Perhaps they want a Vegemite sandwich. That's all that they want in the world. And you think, okay, well, if that is really truly all that this character wants in the world, that's, pretty simple kind of person, not too worried about the things. But then you can learn a bit more depth about this character by answering the second question. What are they willing to do to get what they want? They're willing to kill someone. They're actually willing to murder someone to get a Vegemite sandwich. And then you think, oh, that's not what I expected them to be like. That's a bit scary. And then 3, how do they plan on getting it? You learn more about them again. So you can see there's levels of depth and understanding that you can develop about a character the more you answer these questions. So before you start writing, I encourage you to be answering these 3 questions about your main character. So this is the plot itself. This is driving this is the motivation. This is what drives the story. This is what drives characterization. So these are really important questions. Definitely be asking yourselves these as you are developing your characters. All right, let's talk a little bit about narrative structure. So if you're thinking about how you might change your story up, how you might make it feel a little bit fresh and unique, then these are some different things you might be considering. So the most typical story, the one that we're all most familiar with, is this idea of linear or chronological stories. So this is stories where events occur in the order that they happened. They move forward pretty seamlessly. Then we have non-linear or fractured stories in the sense where time is disjointed within them. There are flash forwards, there are flashbacks. Events aren't occurring in the order that they happened. And then we have circular stories, so the story ends where it begins. This could be literal in the fact that the character starts in one specific place and ends the story in that specific place, or it could be more abstract in the sense that an idea is brought up at the beginning or the end, those sorts of things. Then we have parallel stories where multiple storylines are occurring at the same time, or frame stories where a story is occurring within a story. One of the most famous examples of this is the Shakespearean play Hamlet, where there is a play that goes on within the play. So the Denmark court puts on a play. Hamlet himself puts on a play within the play itself. It's sort of inception sort of moment. I will note that with your parallel and frame stories, these can be a little bit tricky to fit into the short story context because you just don't have loads of words. I would say that the parallel stories are the most complicated to do in short story form, so be really thinking carefully about if you want to do that, but frame can be manageable if you are clever about it. And then I won't spend too much time talking about structure since we talked about this earlier in our creative spoken response, but definitely be using this structure as you're going ahead and planning your work. I actually like to plan the story using this explicit shape when I'm doing it, and I just write my notes around each of the different elements of the story here. So starting with your exposition, conflict, rising tension, climax, falling tension, and resolution. Be specifically thinking about your climax, the emotional high point of the story, and also your resolution, because your resolution is where your message for the audience needs to be the clearest. So really important to be thinking about that. All right.